They said I built my fence too far out, that it was infringing on their greenbelt, that my cattle were grazing on shared community space. They mailed letters, posted warnings, hired a third-party surveyor who marked my oak trees with orange spray paint like they were already condemned. They even claimed I might be squatting on land that did not belong to me, on land my wife's family had owned for over 70 years. Then came the threats. HOA fines for boundary violation, quiet talk of forced removal. One board member even left a voicemail saying, "You can cooperate or we'll escalate." I didn't yell, didn't file a complaint, didn't even respond, because I knew exactly what I was going to do. So I showed up to their next board meeting, alone, wearing a clean shirt, boots polished, briefcase in hand. They smirked when I walked in. That smirk faded fast when I opened my folder, laid out 3 signed plats, and introduced myself calmly. Judge Alan Royce, District Court, 9th Circuit. And in that moment, they realized they weren't just picking a fight with a rancher. They were messing with the man who writes the rulings they're governed by. And now, they were in contempt. If an HOA can push you off your land with nothing but noise, with empty threats, doctored surveys, and bold-faced lies, what happens when you've spent your entire life upholding the very law they're trying to twist? They thought I was just another holdout, another old man on a ranch with a rusty gate and no fight left in him. But behind that gate was a courtroom, one I had presided over for nearly 2 decades. One where I had ruled on land disputes far more complex than theirs, where I had seen every dirty tactic, every legal loophole, every greedy grab for what was never theirs. They came after my property lines like they owned the map. But I didn't just own the land. I knew how to defend it. I didn't need to raise my voice. Because in the end, they didn't walk into a neighborhood dispute. They walked headfirst into a legal reckoning, a boundary dispute, with a judge. My name is Judge Alan Royce. But out here, people just call me Royce or the man with the big barn by the cottonwoods. And I prefer it that way. See, I've spent most of my adult life in courtrooms, black robes, raised benches, eyes scanning stacks of paper while attorneys volley back and forth like it's a chess match with human consequences. But this ranch, this land, this is where my soul lives. I inherited it from my late wife's family. Been in their bloodline since 1953. 176 acres of honest soil, pine wind, and cattle fence running from the ridge line down to the stream bed. My wife, Eleanor, was born in the same 2-bedroom house that still stands out here. She taught me how to build a gate before she taught me how to dance. She passed 5 years ago, and every inch of this place still feels like her. I retired early from the bench, but I kept my position on the senior judicial panel. I don't flaunt it. I don't use it. Out here, I'm not Judge Royce. I'm just a man who knows how to run fence line, fix a tractor, and appreciate silence. And that's what I was doing the morning it started, walking my northern boundary fence with a thermos in hand, checking for wind damage from the storm the night before. That's when I saw it. A plastic sign, brand new, bright white, hammered into the soft ground just 10 feet inside my fence line. It read, "Community Greenbelt, no trespassing beyond this point. Hilltop Lakes HOA Enforcement Committee." I blinked, then blinked again. It was on my side of the fence. I followed the barbed line back 20 yards. Same story. 3 more markers, each deeper into my pasture. Whoever did it wasn't guessing. They were staking a claim. I pulled one of the signs out of the ground, turned it over. On the back was a sticker, surveyed by Horizon Planning Solutions. Never heard of them. I hiked back to the house and called the county recorder's office. Asked for any new filings that mentioned my parcel or the adjacent subdivision. There was one, submitted 2 weeks earlier by Hilltop Lakes HOA. A proposed Greenbelt overlay amendment to their community zoning plan. They were trying to extend their Greenbelt onto my land. The next week, I got the first letter. Nicely formatted. Certified mail. HOA letterhead. It said, "Dear adjacent property holder, our recent land survey identified minor boundary overlap between your fence line and Hilltop's protected Greenbelt zone. We kindly ask that you remove the encroaching fencing and return access to the shared ecological corridor by March 30th. Minor boundary overlap. They were trying to take 30 yards off the north edge of my ranch. That's where my cattle graze. That's where the path runs that Eleanor used to walk every evening with our old hound, Tucker. They didn't just want my fence moved. They wanted her memory erased. I replied the same way I always do in court. Calm, precise, and deadly accurate. I asked for a copy of the certified survey, legal basis for land reassignment, any public notice of zoning change, an easement agreement signed by a property owner, namely, none came. Instead, I got more letters. They got bolder, more aggressive. They cited non-compliance, threatened legal escalation, warned of possible lien assessments. Then came the emails, then phone calls, then the rumors. I'd stop at the feed store and hear someone whisper, "Ain't that Royce's place they're saying is on Greenbelt land now?" Someone even said, "I built my house on public property." I laughed. I have the land patent hanging on my office wall, signed by the state and sealed decades before any HOA ever thought to show up with a laminated map and a drone. I stayed quiet, but I took notes, and I waited. It got worse. 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching near the northern edge. Not animals, not deer, a white truck. I grabbed my coat and walked the quarter-mile to the fence line. That's when I saw them, 3 men in safety vests, one holding a can of orange spray paint. They were walking the line, marking trees, stones, and soil on my side. I stepped out from the pine thicket and said, "Can I help you boys with something?" The man with the spray paint startled. He stammered, "We're just, marking boundaries." "Who's?" "Hilltop HOA. We were contracted to apply visual identifiers for a planned greenbelt restoration. You're standing on private land." He blinked. "Sir, we have authorization. Do you have a permit? An easement? A court order?" He hesitated. "We were told by the board that the boundary had shifted." I cut him off. "Son, a shifted boundary doesn't make its own law. Land is land, and I've got the original plat to prove where this line sits. You're painting trees that my wife's grandfather planted." He opened his mouth again. I raised a hand. "Calm, controlled. Walk, back, out." They did. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just ignorance. This was coordinated. The HOA wasn't guessing. They were trying to rewrite the map, with ink, with surveys, with rumors, and if all else failed, with spray paint. They thought they could intimidate me, pressure me, drown me in paperwork and hearsay until I backed off and cooperated. But I didn't just own the land. I knew how to defend it. They thought they were playing with a rancher, but they were setting themselves up for something much bigger than a fence line argument. Because I was done waiting, and the next time we talked, it wouldn't be on the pasture. It would be in the room where rulings are made. They didn't come back with bulldozers. Not yet. What came next was quieter, smoother. The kind of escalation you only notice if you know what to look for. And unfortunately for them, I do. I've ruled on enough property disputes to know how power behaves when it doesn't get its way. It doesn't scream. It whispers in paperwork. It rewrites maps. It plants doubt in silence, hoping that by the time truth wakes up, the damage is done. So I went digging. I started with the county recorder's office. Walked in with a thermos of black coffee and a smile. Greeted Margaret at the desk. She's been there longer than any of the commissioners. I gave her the parcel number for my ranch and the one for the development next door, Hilltop Lakes. It took her 20 minutes to pull the files. She handed me 2 thick manila folders, stamped and dated. I read every page right there in the research room under the humming fluorescent lights. What I found was simple. My parcel, 213R, hadn't changed since 1953. All boundaries were intact, recorded, uncontested. The fence in question was clearly within the property line. The supposed greenbelt zone claimed by Hilltop, not registered, not recorded, and not zoned by the county. In other words, their entire claim was fiction. But fiction, when printed on fancy paper with a stamp in the corner, becomes dangerous. Because then I found the real twist. Tucked inside Hilltop's file was an updated community survey, dated just 6 weeks ago, commissioned not by the county, but by Horizon Planning Solutions, a private firm out of state. That name rang a bell. I did a little research that night. Horizon Planning's executive director, Cameron R. Ellis. Same last name as the Hilltop HOA board president, Nathan Ellis. Nephew. They hired his nephew to resurvey the land and redraw the line, extending the HOA's greenbelt overlay a full 40 feet past its legally zoned border. No public notice, no county filing, just a private document signed by a biased surveyor and waved around like gospel truth. And it was working. The next morning, I went into town for feed and fencing staples. As I loaded up, I noticed two men talking by the register. They went quiet when I walked in. One of them, Randy, who owns the gas station, looked at me sideways and said, "Hey, Royce, heard you're having some zoning issues up on the ridge." I gave him a slow nod. "That's so." He shrugged. "Guy from the HOA stopped in here last week. Said your house was partially on open space now. Said it'd probably get cleared up soon." I didn't answer, just paid for my supplies. But inside, the tension was climbing. By the end of the week, I'd heard it 3 more times. "Is your house really past the line? They say your barn sits in the buffer zone. Aren't you supposed to move the fence?" They were spreading the story. No formal filings. No court petitions. Just rumors. They weren't fighting a legal battle. They were running a PR campaign, one designed to erode my footing before I ever stepped into a courtroom. I could feel it. A neighbor who used to wave from his porch now stared blankly as I passed. A local blogger posted a vague community awareness piece about longtime residents clinging to land they no longer own. Someone pinned a flyer to the feed store bulletin board titled, "Who Really Owns the Greenbelt?" All without naming me. But they didn't have to. I saw the paint. I saw the maps. I saw the pressure building and knew what came next. They were trying to goad me, to make me mad, to force me into yelling or storming into a meeting so they could call me aggressive or unhinged. But I've seen this play before. I've sentenced men for less coordinated fraud than this. So I stayed quiet, and I got ready. I spent 2 nights assembling a legal binder, thicker than anything they'd ever seen. Inside, my original deed and land patent, 3 certified boundary surveys, county zoning maps with historic overlays, photos of my fence dating back 20 years, a notarized affidavit from my wife's father describing the original fence built in 1974, and an appendix detailing the conflict of interest between Horizon Planning and the HOA president. I indexed every document, added a letter of intent to pursue injunctive relief for harassment and trespass if actions continued. I even included precedent from 2 cases I personally presided over, both involving HOAs overreaching into adjacent rural land. Both times the HOA lost. I printed the final page in bold. This document constitutes formal notice. Any further attempt to alter, remove, or redefine boundary lines without legal authority will result in immediate legal action filed in the district over which I currently serve as senior judge. Still, I didn't sign it with my title. Not yet. They still didn't know who they were messing with. And I was going to let that work in my favor for just a little longer. Because people who abuse power usually don't stop until they feel it crash down on top of them. And I was about to bring the full weight of the law, the real law, into their cozy boardroom. Not as a rancher, not as a neighbor, but as the judge they should have never tested. I didn't need to swing back fast. I needed to swing back smart. Because if there's one thing that years behind the bench taught me, it's this: people who build their case on fiction will always expose themselves. You just have to give them enough rope and let them talk long enough. So I got to work. First step, the paper trail. I spent 3 days pulling records, not just my own, but everything connected to Hilltop Lakes and their Greenbelt expansion. I didn't stop at zoning maps or plat surveys. I went into the archives, found the original federal land grant that established my wife's family's claim over this land, complete with coordinates surveyed by the U.S. Department of the Interior in 1953. Still legally binding, still protected by grandfather clause exemptions the HOA never even thought to check. I had it notarized at the county clerk's office. While I was there, I made a stop at the district court clerk's window. Not to file anything yet, just to quietly verify that no land dispute had ever been opened against my parcel. No active encroachments, no pending corrections, nothing. Just one clean property file, never contested, never lost. And now, never getting touched. Step 2, the letter. I drafted a formal pre-litigation notice addressed to the Hilltop Lakes HOA. I didn't send it for myself, not as Alan Royce. I had it sent by AR Holdings, one of the LLCs I set up years ago to manage land trusts for my family's estate. The letter was clear, direct, and laced with quiet legal pressure. It read, "To the Board of Directors, Hilltop Lakes HOA. It has come to our attention that your association has misrepresented property boundaries adjacent to Parcel 213 are currently held by AR Holdings, LLC. Your recent unauthorized marking of said land and public statements regarding ownership constitute a breach of legal boundary, civil trespass, and reputational harm. Should this harassment continue, we are prepared to seek injunctive relief, pursue monetary damages, and initiate a formal audit of your board's actions. You are hereby requested to cease and desist all further interference until boundary review is completed in accordance with county records. Sincerely, Legal Counsel, AR Holdings." It landed like a grenade in their inbox. I know because Greg, the HOA secretary, emailed me privately 2 days later. Subject line, "Hi neighbor, hope we can work this out." He said things had gotten heated and maybe the survey company overstepped. He even hinted that the HOA might be open to compromise. That was the first crack, and I wasn't done. Step 3, the binder. I assembled a black leather binder. No frills, just facts. Inside were my original land title and federal grant, 3 county-recorded plats with official seals, photographs of the fence and trees they spray-painted, the notarized affidavit from my late wife's father, a certified copy of their nephew's survey, complete with conflict of interest documentation, and finally, 3 case summaries. Greystone versus Alder HOA. Ruling. Adjacent property owners not subject to HOA claims absent voluntary covenant. Williams versus East Oak Development. Ruling. Private land titles supersede unrecorded HOA overlays. Ferguson versus Silver Ridge Board. Ruling. Survey firms with undisclosed familial relationships to boards are inadmissible in jurisdictional disputes. I knew those cases intimately because I wrote 2 of those rulings myself. I tabbed them and read, and on the last page of the binder, I slipped in a sealed envelope. Inside, my business card, the one that read, Honorable Alan Royce, Senior Judge, 9th District Court, Land Use, Property, and Equity Division. They wouldn't see that card yet, but they'd feel the weight of it very soon. Step 4, the invitation. I called the HOA office directly and asked to be added to the agenda for their next board meeting. They said the issue would need to be reviewed in advance. I said that was fine. I told them I was interested in settling the matter in person, face to face. The woman on the phone, I think it was Carol, sounded nervous. "Will this be confrontational?" "No, ma'am," I replied. "This will be informative." In the days leading up to the meeting, the whispering picked up again. I heard someone at the diner mention that the rancher's bringing a lawyer. Someone else said I'd hired a surveyor to start tearing up HOA property, which, of course, was nonsense. They were rattled, which meant the timing was perfect, and I wasn't alone. I quietly asked one of my former law clerks, now an active court administrator, to attend with me. She didn't need to say anything. Just be there, professional, confident, holding the second copy of the binder. I knew how this would play out. They'd open the floor to the gentleman from Parcel 213R. They'd give me 5 minutes to speak, and in that 5 minutes, I was going to deliver the one thing they hadn't prepared for. The law, not shouted, not threatened, but delivered, calmly, undeniably, and with the authority they'd been pretending to wield without ever earning it. The Hilltop Lakes HOA meetings were typically held in their clubhouse, glass doors, polished floors, folding chairs stacked in perfect lines. It was the kind of space designed for polite applause and catered coffee. But tonight, the chairs were already filled before I arrived. Rumors had done their job. People were whispering about the rancher with a lawyer, that he was bringing paperwork, that he was about to shut the whole thing down. They didn't know how right they were. I walked in at 5:58 p.m., clean button-up shirt, boots polished, black binder under one arm. Behind me was Danielle, my former law clerk, sharp suit, neutral expression, voice recorder in her left hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She set the recorder on the table in front of us. Pressed a single button. A red light blinked. The board members noticed. So did the crowd. The HOA president, Nathan Ellis, of course, sat in the center of the board like a man about to host a game show. Papers spread in front of him, collar slightly too tight, the smugness already curling at the corners of his mouth. He leaned forward as I approached the microphone. "Mr. Royce," he said, drawing out the pause like he was chewing the name. "Are you ready to cooperate this time?" I smiled, just enough to be polite. "Actually," I said, setting the binder on the lectern, "it's Judge Royce. Senior Judge, District Court, Ninth Circuit, Property and Land Use Division." Silence. A half-dozen people in the room audibly inhaled. Someone dropped a pen. Another person choked on their coffee. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. The tension hit like a crack of thunder across still water. I opened the binder. First page, a certified federal land grant. I turn it to face the board. This document confirms that Parcel 213 has been in private, titled possession since 1953. Surveyed. Sealed. Recorded. I flip to the next. "This is your nephew's unfiled survey, commissioned outside legal zoning authority, with conflict of interest not disclosed to your members. This is what you use to claim you had rights over my fence line." Next page. "This is the county zoning map from last month. Not 1 inch of that greenbelt you keep referencing extends beyond the development border. No approval, no overlay, no public filing. In short, your claim is fiction." By now, the crowd was dead quiet. I glanced around the room and let the silence breathe. Then I continued. "I've ruled on more than a dozen HOA overreach cases in my time. 3 of them involved illegal surveys. 2 involved intimidation of non-member landholders. All 5 ended with board dissolutions and civil penalties." I flipped to the final tab section. "These are those rulings. You can find my name at the bottom of each." I saw Greg, the board secretary, lean over to whisper something to Nathan. Nathan waved him off, but his face was draining color fast. "I didn't come here tonight to argue," I said. "I came to correct the record, and to warn you. I'll let that hang for a beat. Any further attempts to claim, mark, or interfere with my property will be interpreted as an intentional act of fraud, trespass, and harassment. Grounds for a full judicial ethics review under the HOA Governance Integrity Statute." I look directly at Nathan now. "And if I find even one more painted tree, one more rumor flyer, one more attempt to rewrite boundaries without state oversight, I will issue a referral to the district attorney for civil investigation." A woman in the crowd gasped. Danielle leaned forward slightly, her recorder still blinking red. Nathan swallowed hard. We didn't know who you were. This is just what happens." I cut in when power thinks it can lie louder than the law. Greg stood up, visibly shaken. I moved to enter immediate board review." Another member stood. Seconded. The room stirred. Voices rose. A third voice called a vote. Hands shot up across the board table, fast, clumsy, desperate to get ahead of what was unraveling in real time. Nathan sat still, eyes wide. But it didn't matter anymore. The vote passed. Effective immediately, the Hilltop Lakes HOA board entered emergency transition review. And Nathan? He stood slowly, face pale and lips tight. "I resign," he muttered. "Effective now." He didn't look at me as he walked out. Didn't say another word. But the weight of his silence said everything I needed to hear. As the meeting closed, residents approached me. Not in fear, not in defiance, but in relief. "I'm sorry," one man said. "I believe them. I didn't know. I should have said something sooner," a woman whispered. "When they spray-painted those trees." Another just nodded and said, "Thank you. I didn't lecture. I didn't scold. I just said what needed to be said. Boundaries exist for a reason. Respect them, and we never have a problem." Then I packed my binder. Danielle clicked off the recorder. And together, we walked out into the dark, leaving behind a room that would never look at land the same way again. 2 months passed. Gone were the letters, the orange spray paint, the whispers. In their place came structure, honesty, clarity. The new HOA board, formed within 3 weeks of Nathan Ellis' resignation, made its first act one of accountability. At their first public meeting, the new president stood in front of a packed room and said, "We were wrong. The land was never ours. And the line we tried to cross wasn't just drawn in soil, it was drawn in law." They didn't stop there. They sent a formal letter, signed and notarized, to the county planning office, acknowledging the ranch's original boundary and stating they would never attempt to alter or claim land outside their jurisdiction again. That letter is now framed in my office, right above the fireplace where my wife used to hang wildflowers in the spring. They also passed a new internal regulation. Every board member must now attend a property rights seminar before holding a voting seat. It's a small thing, but small things grow roots. So do lessons. And when a community finally understands what it nearly lost, it starts to treat what it has with far more care. I didn't press charges, didn't sue, didn't demand restitution or settlements, because this was never about punishment. It was about remembrance. Eleanor always told me that land is a teacher, that it doesn't just belong to us, we belong to it, that we are stewards, not owners, protectors, not possessors. So I did what she would have done. I opened the northwest pasture, the same patch they tried to claim, and turned it into an outdoor learning space. The county approved the designation, Ward Ranch Wildlife Corridor. I partnered with the local high school and nearby college biology department. Now, every spring, students hike that stretch of fence line, taking notes on native grass, deer migration, and eagle nests. They learn about conservation, not just ownership, about coexisting, not conquering. Some of those students now know more about the land than the HOA ever did. And every single one of them knows why that pasture still stands intact. Then something else happened. At the county board meeting later that fall, a motion passed, quietly, unanimously. They renamed the old Fire Road trailhead that runs behind the southern ridge. It's now marked with a wooden sign, carved by hand, stained deep red. Eleanor Royce Trailhead, in honor of those who walked before we mapped the path. When I saw it for the first time, I didn't say anything. I just ran my hand over the grain, stood there for a while, let the wind carry her memory down the slope like it always used to. The ranch hasn't changed much. Still the same quiet place, same fence, same trees, same porch where I sip my coffee at sunrise. But now it's not just mine. It's a reminder, a line that could not be erased, a place where power didn't win because it was loud, but because it was right. They came from my land thinking I would bend, but the land never bent, because truth, when rooted deep, doesn't break under pressure. It holds, and if you stand with it, you do too. They try to redraw my lines with noise and spray paint, try to turn fiction into fact, whispering rumors, waving fake surveys, painting over trees like that could erase decades of truth. They thought silence meant surrender, that if they pushed just hard enough, I'd fold like paper and walk away from everything my family had built. But boundaries aren't made by bullies. They're protected by law, not just by the kind printed on county maps, but by the kind written in history, in sweat, in the quiet confidence of knowing where you stand and why no one has the right to move you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't post online. I didn't pound fists on a table. I just walked into their meeting, opened a binder, and told the truth, backed by every statute they ignored and every line they crossed. And when they finally realized who they were dealing with, it was too late. So if they ever look at you the way they looked at me, with arrogance, assumptions, and that smug little smile, don't flinch. Just smile back. Because if they think you'll back down because you're quiet, they better pray you're not carrying the law in your pocket.